Welcome, everyone, into Garden of Thought. I am your host, Jeff Lippman, and today we're getting back into the world of policy, specifically U.S. policy and politics. So if you're not American, you may want to check out, but maybe you don't. I don't know. If you are American, you should absolutely listen to this, especially if you're someone who's given up on the system, feel that either of the parties or both of the parties have let you down, or that really doesn't matter what either or both of the parties do because the system is rigged. Probably want to tune today because our guest today is Tom Joseph, and he has some ideas on the subject, and he has what we think might be a solution. Don't know. I'm going to learn about it when you learn about it. So he's Tom Joseph. He is the founder and treasurer of America's Main Street Party. Welcome to the show.
Jeff, thanks so much for having me on the show. It's always a privilege to, talk about this idea.
Good. Terrific. Well, you're welcome. Anybody who's listened to the show for a while, and has gone up and down with me with the variety, whenever I get into policy, I always talk about my idea for the one ring that rules them all. And we were discussing that earlier, but I never actually told you what I meant by that, though maybe it speaks for itself, but maybe it doesn't. And to the audience who's heard this before, I'm sorry for repeating, but this is a new guest since the first time he's hearing it. And we'll see if there's any context to what I'm talking about to his notions in the conversation. In any event, there's a lot of things in this country that people want to fix. And not everyone is unified on any of it, but there's a lot of things that are hard to do. And doing any of them would be hard to do. What do I mean? If you don't think we have a representative government, it's hard to fix that. If you don't like the election system, it's hard to fix that. If you think the Electoral College is bad, it's hard to fix that. If you don't like that we seemingly have a duopoly, it's hard to fix that. If you think that immigration reform is something that should be done, hard to fix that. Gun control, hard to fix it. You don't like how the emoluments clause apparently is meaningless, it's hard to fix that. Point is, it's hard to fix anything. And the one ring that I feel that would fix them all is to have absolute campaign finance restrictions, no public money whatsoever, no private money, no PAC money, no secret money, no money from foreign anything. Unfortunately, it would have to be public monies, and you'd have to find some way to make there be a viable candidate and some safeguards on as to not jimmy that, because people can jimmy anything. So smarter people than me will have to work on those secondary guardrails. But if you get rid of the money, you get rid of the power of the two parties, or they have to adjust to be representative to the people that they represent. And I truly believe that 70% of Americans agree on big picture things. And even if they don't agree on like 10 out of 10 points on them, that they're willing to compromise on 4 of them to get to 6. I think most people understand that progress, perfection is not the opposition to good or better. With that, that's my one ring that rules them all. It seems like you agree to that in a certain extent, but in our pre-production talks, which were sort of brief, and they're supposed to be, it seems like you may have a ring that's even better, because mine are limited to federal, national level elections and doesn't touch upon states and local at all. Yours might. I don't know. So one, you can either start by telling me what you think about mine, or B, you can start with your ideas and we can, see if mine cycles into it at all naturally.
Let's start with yours and see how it directly melds into mine. It actually goes back to a founding constitutional principle that elections need to be free and equal. And one of our founding fathers, James Wilson, actually added the words "and equal" to what was previously a free election clause for about 100 years, saying that, hey, it's not enough for anybody to be able to run to be your representative. If the election isn't fair, it'll taint the well. He referred to free and equal elections as the original fountain of democracy. And if you taint the well, it poisons all aspects of the state. These were documented in one of the very first law lectures in the United States. And so what you're saying is absolutely true. It is the one ring. And he believed that if you purify the fountain of democracy, it will cleanse the system. And I believe wholeheartedly in what you're saying is that this system, Wilson's Fountain, is what I have another initiative called Wilson's Fountain, is about creating an original fountain of democracy and cleansing the system.
Well, I like what I'm hearing so far. I especially like that you also agree with me, because, and not just because I like that someone agrees with me.
No, it makes sense. It makes sense that if things aren't fair when you choose a representative, how is it going to be fair after you choose a representative?
Absolutely.
So money is distorting representation. Our concept, if you come up with a system where there's money is absent from the process, it'll return the representative to the center of the bell curve. If you have a spectrum applied on a population, it's some form of bell curve. And right now, there's no performance to elect people. There's no incentive for them to be at the center of the bell curve because money guarantees they'll get elected. And so in both red and blue districts, you have more navy and ruby red than the district really is, especially gerrymandered districts where you've now put a population of opposition votes who should be pushing that representation back to the center.
Yeah, I'm sure you see the maps that I see, and everybody, shows all the red versus all the blue, and it looks much bigger. And then the counter map is where the population centers, and of course it's much more blue where the people live as opposed to not. And all that is nice and all that is cute, but it's a little pedantic. It's a little bit about platitudes because, as you point out, even in the reddest of red state, it's probably still 60-40, which is not, when I was growing up, I'm in my late 50s now, a mandate, or a landslide was, Reagan versus Mondale was a landslide. Nixon was a landslide. Well, forget about what happened to him, afterwards because of what he did before. Those were landslides. Those were mandates. Now, if somebody wins by 2 or 3 points or more than 4 points, I think it's a landslide. Or just electorally, they have, the current president won by a lot of electoral votes, but the popular vote, the difference was like 0.8% or like 1 point, whatever it is. That's not a landslide or a mandate, in my old-fashioned way of viewing things in just numbers. That is, maybe it's a technical landslide. I'm not an election denier, but we all used to live in the same world and speak the same language, or at least most people did. And now it's like there's 1,000 different dialects, and then nobody's even trying to get that Star Trek universal translator.
Yeah. Well, I certainly agree. And, let's talk about the solution.
Yes.
What happened was that I was I'm kind of retired and was sitting, during the COVID trying to figure out, what's going to happen in my business. And I still own, a substantial company and was very scared about that. So I, of course, applied for PPP loans. And I made a promise that if I got funding that would help save my business, maybe save my life, that I would do something. But I knew I didn't want to run for office because I felt like people that run for office just become part of this bad system. And I knew that I came with an idea that required laws to be changed. This is an uphill battle. Not that the battle I'm in is uphill, but I think I've discovered a relatively easy, cheap, inexpensive, and fair way to break the two-party system. And the loophole that I discovered is that if you create a process where the candidates don't spend money, a political party can do whatever it wants to choose those representatives. Right now, the political parties do it in a back room. I'm going to create an alternate primary. One to compete with the current one that's terrible. Because this is a way to put a market force pressure on elected officials to change the system. Because say, hey, you do not have a monopoly on that. We can create a better way to nominate a representative. And if we insert these fair contests into these unfair districts, the person that emerges from it's going to be more popular. And they're going to win the general election, especially if we can get the participation levels up. So the approach is to do this very targeted. Do an equal number of blue and red districts, say 10 blue, 10 red, and use a super PAC to market to them And we're almost creating like a business structure where the super PACs, the marketing department, the national party, America's Main Street Party, is the IT or the tech department. And then we use local committees to actually run the contests in these districts so the citizens there feel like, they've been part of it, and it's not being run by some person often wherever. So it's a local committee runs the contest, and at the end of the day, the nominee has to agree in exchange for the funding in the general election to make somebody in that local committee treasurer their campaign committee, and to spend down the money, return the money. There's no war chest in the system. And that's really where the system is broken, how the politicians can accumulate money over election cycles and basically guarantee the reelection coming in. That's why they're not accountable.
They could also use that money for anything that is at all tied to running for reelection, which includes doing things while you're in office that you might say is part of running for reelection. I mean, especially in the Congress, it's 2-year cycles. So, I mean, traveling back and forth to your district is running for reelection. And
they can. The other thing they can do is kind of pernicious, is that they can transfer money from their committees to other, fellow Democrats and Republicans. So it allows them to influence votes. Use war chest to help other people out, transfer money into their committees, say, hey, I've got a war chest, you don't. Vote for this legislation, I'll slide you $10,000, whatever it is. And these are the things this is how money is corrupting our system in ways that most people don't even realize. And you see the obvious things, in terms of like travel and the way they pad their lifestyle. But the more important things are, what are they doing that's actually changing how they vote? Which means that they're not being represented. They're putting party ahead of country instead of their citizens.
Right. Or they can say, listen, I've had enough, but, you, Mr. and Miss X, sponsor me for the country club and give me a board seat on your, on these two companies that both pay me X amount in stipend, and I'll support you, and I will transfer my war chest over to you. It'll be your war chest. And, everyone's sitting pretty. So yeah, I could see how that becomes a cycle that can, repeat itself endlessly. You did mention earlier, though, the super PAC. So obviously this idea to avoid money has to start with money. So I think it's important that we have to, you have to explain that part away, or explain.
Well, I mean, any system costs money to operate. I think the difference is that right now, if you donate money to a political party or political candidate, it's going to result in some terrible advertising. If you donate money to America's Main Street Party, we're going to build an app and a portal that's going to be a permanent asset for the country, for us to create a fair system for people to get nominated to be a representative. And, where are we putting our money? We put our money into this terrible system. We spend tons of money in these marginal districts to convince small numbers of voters to go one way or the other. I mean, it's really, when you look about how we spend money on elections, it's so wasteful. So what I'm proposing, I believe, is a way more efficient way to spend our money in a fair way, because ultimately we want to get rid of all this campaign advertising. If you go to our website and we have a beta version of this app, you can see how it will play out. And the goal of this beta version is for people to see that we really don't need advertising to choose who represents us. We can come up with a level playing field that allows people to put public service announcements, a bio, policy positions, to weigh in on how they would vote on certain types of legislation, and make a really systematic way for us to choose who represents us.
What is the website?
mainstreetparty.org. If you go to the page called A Brand New Way, there's a narrative that explains this 5-round process for going from, imagine if it's free and equal, you're going to have a lot of contestants. But we're showing that easier than Wordle, you would go in and say, hey, these are my issues that I care about. And you'd be able to find out which candidates match you on those issues. And without even checking them out, you could just endorse them all. We would use a system called approval voting, where in the early rounds, you can basically vote for as many people who meet your qualifications. This ensures that you don't have to put all your eggs in one basket. You can say, hey, you know what, there's 16 candidates that actually feel the same way I do. So I'm going to endorse all, see who makes the top 20. Now we're in the top 20. 6 of my people came through. Do I want to check them out? Well, actually, I should just really endorse all 6 because I really want to get somebody that cares about the same things I do. So we eliminate like American Idol down to a top 20, a top 10, to a top 4. When we get to the top 4, I want to, create like a town hall atmosphere that more questions, more content, create a compelling reason for more people in the district to now engage. Because the idea like Olympic trials or a reality contest is as it goes on, an audience builds. So we have this town hall round. Not to go from 4 to 1, but to go 4 to 2. So you can have a debate, final debate, and have the district weigh in, and the majority of them agree on who's going to be their nominee. And imagine this now, Jeff. A district's gone through this process where maybe the same number of people that participate in public primaries, about 100,000 people, participate in this. And their choice now is to pick this people they chose, that they filtered out, that survived a gauntlet, or the incumbent Republican or Democrat who's just going to do the bidding of the party. I think if we get this implemented, we're winning.
Do you have to register as a political party in any way, shape, or form?
We are. America's Main Street Party is a 527 committee.
Okay.
So, and the super PAC would be registered as super PAC. The local committees would be registered local committees. But the goal right now, the party, is to further develop the app. What you see now on the website is a skeleton version of what we would come up with. But even the skeleton version, to me, proves that you don't need advertising to choose who represent you. If you don't need advertising, you don't need money.
So it's not even ranked voting where you pick 1, 2, 3, or 4. You can actually pick, you can vote for everybody. I guess at some point it gets whittled down because not everybody's going to vote for everybody, or, some people can do that.
There's many people who are voting.
Is there politicking? Is there caucusing, or is it all distant enough that there's you can mitigate that?
Yeah, we're creating a party where there's no party leadership that has any influence other than making sure that the contest is run correctly. The idea of popular sovereignty is that the people make the decisions, that you drive the decisions down to the people. Right now, the political parties tell us who to vote for, and they do it in these unfair districts where your choice is to vote for this person or somebody who's completely, at the other end of the spectrum. So, and this is true in 85 to 90% of the districts, that people just don't face competition for re-election because the folks coming in for re-election have a war chest of money, and it's impossible to take them down. The only way they go down is if they disappoint party leadership and they want to primary them. And if they primary them, they primary them to the left or the right, not to the center. So this is a way of elevating candidates that will be more pink and baby blue, so that the general election comes down to a choice of, well, what color is your district? Are you ruby red? Are you pink? Are you baby blue? Or are you navy? And I think if we can create 4 factions, the parties being those moneyed, dark red, dark blue factions, and then we create these moneyless factions in Congress, that it will bring balance to the way Congress operates.
No, I totally agree that if you have a more representative government, you'll get more representative policies, which will in turn make people feel more enfranchised or franchised with the service. Yeah, enfranchised. And disillusionment. I mean, it takes a while to turn a tanker, but disillusionment starts to go down. And, I would imagine that also one of the first orders of business for the new legislature, hopefully, would be, no insider trading for anyone, can't trade, things like that. So the emoluments clause means what it says,
Well, Jeff,
like
I think what happens first is that if you get enough people that come into this Congress that don't belong to, they're liberals and conservatives, but they're not part of the Republican Democratic Party, it'll force the election of Speaker of the House into the main chamber. And the person who's Speaker of the House will not be a party leader. It'll be somebody from a swing district who really has to serve the country, not just their party. And then all those things you're talking about, loyalty to your representative, because once you're in office, you can get away with murder. That's going to go away. And I think this really returns the accountability. And enforcing things like emolling, all the things that we know they're cheating on would be enforced.
Right now it's like pro wrestling with faction war, and then there's there's like
True.
3 or 4 people who are the wild cards. Like today it's John Cornyn, over the Attorney General. There's the other story of, is Mitch McConnell competent to dead, anywhere on that spectrum right now as a overarching thing. There's a congressman in Ohio who has, the scandal of the day, who's been, accused of abusing his wife and child. And, obviously innocent until proven guilty, but, there used to be a time where if something like that came out about, at least the latter two, it was, the party got rid of it. They at least had, standing enough and ethics enough and morals enough to say this is bad for all of us. Now it's like, we can't afford to lose any of our numbers. We're going to try to hold on to that number no matter what.
There's a time when somebody said, "Have you no shame?" that they actually had shame. It's been a long time, but the thing that you didn't mention, I'll throw in on there, if you just look at what happened in South Carolina. I mean, the founders hated inherited power, and the idea of just putting somebody in an office, and this happens on both sides. I've seen where Democrats is, somebody's retired and would want their kid to take their seat or whatever. That's not what this is about. And our system would allow that if somebody passed away, and a lot of people in Congress passing away these days, that we could run a mini special election to figure out who the nominee is or who should be considered. I mean, we have that. It's better than just saying, "Hey, let's let the governor or the president, one person, decide." That is not popular sovereignty. And it'd be one thing if it was just for a few months, but now they want her to take that position for 6 years. And what do they do in exchange for that? If somebody gives you a Senate seat, you feel beholden. And the whole idea is that our system, the only people represented should be beholden to are their citizens.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, they should represent their constituents and the United States. I mean, and I understand that sometimes those two things will differ, but I think as long as you're operating in good faith, you can explain yourself. And if you're operating in good faith, you should be able to explain yourself. And, again, I don't think that people require that you agree with them. Well, these days with social media, it seems like it, but I don't think that most people actually in reality require that you agree with them on 10 out of 10 things. If you agree with them on 6 out of 10 things and on another 2 or 3, you could probably find places to compromise. That's a home run. That's Hall of Fame numbers. Because I do think that most people, in real life are reasonable.
Yes.
We just have to get back to knowing each other that way.
And, I think it's gotten so crazy. You think about, hey, if most of us work for companies, or if this existed in our company, would we make money? Would we be successful? We've accepted this as normal, and it's just not. And to take the money out of it is really, I think, like you said at the beginning of the show, this is the absolute ring of power, or, for the citizens, is to make sure that moneyed interests don't dominate political thought. And that is exactly where we are today.
Can this same party and this same concept work on the gubernatorial and state legislator, or even more local?
Absolutely.
Okay.
No,
so
the idea is for this to be done universally across the board, used by other countries. I mean, what we would like to do is use America's Main Street Party as a company that, tech company is producing an election system, free and equal election systems, make it public domain, and that parties could actually put their brand on it if they didn't want our brand on it, to choose their nominees for their party. But the idea that driving this down to the people choosing the nominees is the absolute key to making sure government works.
Well, and
otherwise, it's not representative.
Well, your one ring is better than mine. I mean, first of all, it doesn't require a constitutional amendment. And secondly, it also it can go to state and local legislatures and any election period. So
it's not true election reform, though. So, what we're doing is saying that, hey, if you're not going to fix the primary and we're just automatically electing people that win the primary, let's create a better primary, and we'll automatically, or at least prove but it doesn't work across the board. Like, to me, this is an ability for us to put representatives in here who will actually do the election reform that you're talking about. I mean, I feel like we need to break the system before we fix the system. And the things you need to do are actual legislation, things that we need to do to make sure that elections are free and equal permanently. But I've just come up with a kind of a strategy and a game plan to set things in motion.
Yeah, I mean, this had been tried before, sort of. The Reform Party, I think, at least titularly, was trying to come across as a common sense party at the time, but didn't always utilize common sense. And of course, it was funded by a billionaire, and he picked an unfortunate candidate who froze in a debate. I don't know if anyone remembers Admiral Stockdale.
Yep.
But and then
that's what got me started, was the 1992 election. Ross Perot, Clinton, Bush.
Right, and for those of us on the Sports Jedi, your affinity was Jesse the Body Ventura was an early adopter of the Reform Party, which started out great, and then as Jesse gives, Jesse also takes away.
But it's still, when I started this, I started thinking I'm launching a political party, and that requires people with money to put up money for their campaigns. It's not significant change. And I think that that's the mistake that Ross made, is that, we didn't really implement change in the way you pick people. Like, he ultimately wanted to become part of the system. We'll never, if we try to fix the existing system or become part of it, we proved that doesn't work.
Yeah, he was just trying to create a third political party. I mean, there's nothing in our Constitution that says 2 political parties. We could have 17 political parties. Just requires money and people to subscribe to them.
The founders, Adams, feared 2 great parties, thought it was the biggest evil that could exist, and Washington warned the same. So, I mean, they actually thought, this is how you get to civil war. If you divide us into just 2 factions, we're doomed. And that's where we are, and being an engineer and knowing about systems are disrupted in one of 2 ways, positively and negatively. A negative disruption here is civil war. Positive disruption is what I'm trying to do.
Well, I've heard a lot of people say things are just math and just science, and that makes sense. I've also heard a lot of people say everything is pro wrestling, and I think both things are true. Probably somewhere out there's a calculus guy that can figure out the formulas to pro wrestling as well. I mean, I guess everything really is math, because everything is an algorithm now.
As it should be. I mean, we're not really taking advantage of the math. I think the parties have figured out how to game the system to make sure that their folks get reelected and they can perpetuate what works for them. And it doesn't just get them reelected. It lines their pockets. I mean, these folks get power, they get book deals, they get, a lot for what they're doing. And they're not. It'd be one thing if everything was great, but it's not.
Well, they can also trade on information that they have that no one else is allowed to trade on. I mean, if you know that a company that's basically worth nothing is about to get a giant U.S. contract, even if you have $1,000, you can buy 1,000 shares, and it goes up to $76. You've made $76,000. You've made $75,000 there. And once you can parlay money into money, it becomes compounding up, especially when you're not gaming it, you're making the rules.
Right.
It's like, yeah. So, I mean, I don't think that there are any poor members of Congress. I mean, and I don't just mean that they get a healthy middle class salary for the job. I mean, I used to hear all we have to have an apartment in Washington, D.C., and 4 Congress people, we share, this little apartment, and we've got to travel back and forth and whatever. And, and then came the PACs and the war chests and all that. And yeah, I mean, sometimes I think that the people who keep the 3 or 4 roommates, first of all, they're never sharing it together. Third, I don't think anyone's sleeping there. And I kind of think maybe it's just for alibis, but maybe I should take off my tinfoil. Speaking of tinfoil, this is very little to do with what we're talking about, but Alex Jones today called for the 25th Amendment and the impeachment of Donald Trump. Alex Jones? I mean, I'm not sure which part of I'm not sure which part to be I should be more rolling my eyes about. I'm listening to Alex Jones, period, or what he said, and they're at opposition with each other. It's I'm not sure which part of the Twilight Zone I'm in, but back to this is to take us out of the Twilight Zone and back to Main Street, which I also remember the Tea Party. Obviously, you do too, because it came after the Reform Party. And I think it started out as a good faith effort, but it immediately got conscripted into, something far different than, a Main Street revolt. It became something completely different. And I don't want to characterize what it is, but it simply just got folded into, one of the two existing political parties and maybe took it over.
And that's why I think third parties fail, is that once you get in there, it's about how do you get reelected. And these party whips control access to super donors. And people are either, leaning left or leaning right, and they want to get reelected. So they now become part of the system. And there's been multiple cases of people that first elected Congress. They seem like perfectly normal folks. And then with an election cycle or two, they're now batshit left or right. And, because the system has an incentive to reward that. In our system, you go back through the free and equal process to win re-election. And if you depart and, leave that system, then you got to compete with the winner of the free and equal election. So, I think you got to return accountability. You have to change the incentive system. If you don't change the incentive system, like I said, I get back to your opening point. If you can't address the money issue here, we're stuck, because we could overturn Citizens United, have open primaries everywhere, implement ranked choice voting everywhere, and we still have a system that's highly rigged to re-elect incumbents. So, and they're not even getting it done. I mean, in 2024, I think there were 8 statewide referendums to put in election reform, and they went 0 for 8, spent close to $100 million. And what I'm talking about, for $100 million, we could disrupt Congress.
How are the local committees populated?
In our paradigm,
mm-hmm.
We'll use the super PAC to recruit them. We see them as like not, I think people are like, well, these are people of power. I think of them as like Olympic swimming committee representatives. You don't know who those people are, right? I mean, they're influential in the fact that they oversee this contest, who makes the Olympic team, but you only know their name if something gets screwed up. For the most part, these are people doing thankless jobs. There's a lot of people who volunteer to work the polls, who want to do their civic duty. I don't think we'll have any problem recruiting those folks and having them, execute what's a pretty simple thing, which is just make sure that people follow the rules and make sure that the constituents have the right issues that are put on the table. It's pretty the only complaints, like, okay, so they picked the 7 issues. Did they pick the right 7 issues? But it's not like it's limited to that. There's also other ways the candidates can say, here's how I weigh in on pro-choice or what, all the different things that they may weigh in. But the 7 issues are mandatory. They have to take positions, and they can take sub-positions.
Okay, so they're not like people in the Star Chamber. They're more like the poor suckers who volunteer to work on the homeowners association, and everybody hates them, and they're always teetering on the verge of financial ruin for the association. Hopefully not themselves.
Right now, somebody who's part of a political committee may actually say, "Hey, we should nominate Jeff." We don't want that at all. I mean, the people that are leaders in this party will have nothing to do with who is on the ballot. It's totally the people's choice.
Okay, well, that's good. So, all right. So tell me, how do people get started? I mean, obviously you're on the podcast, not just to talk about your idea, but also to sell and promote it and help grow it. So how do people get involved? They like what they hear.
Well, the very first thing I think they should do is go to mainstreetparty.org, go to the page A Brand New Way, and learn about the process. This is big change from what we're doing now. And I think the first thing people do is wrap their head around it and actually realize how practical and simple it could actually be. The second thing they could do, I mean, love donations, but there's also a page, wilsonsfountain.us. This really explains the entire thing. America's Main Street Party is the first component in this paradigm. There's a super PAC, local committees, candidates. So in Wilson's Fountain, we define how the whole thing works. But it allowed me to spend money in researching and developing this process without doing it within the party. And there's donation limits in the party. So I'm trying to direct all resources in the party to writing code or promoting the party. But any other type of research I need to do, I'll do it outside of the party.
When you say writing code, you actually mean the code for the app, or you mean like codes of ethics, or both?
Well, yeah, I mean, the rules on how we want to operate have been defined. I mean, they're, what you would expect if you're trying to get a job or make an Olympic team or win American Idol, that it's free and equal. But the money that comes in the party, what I determined is that the only way to get things into a party is to donate money and have the party do it. So the software, as I've determined, has to be developed by the party. If for another entity to develop it and donate to the party is illegal. So I need to raise the money, in increments of $5,000 or less at a time to fund the rest of the development. More importantly, I need to attract a super PAC donor who could actually help accelerate the whole program, because they could actually advertise the concept and get more people to donate. I mean, that's one of the things. So my approach is really just to treat this like I'm launching a business and I'm just working a business plan, and I need to raise money to finish the development and find a venture capitalist that will help this thing go. But I think once we do that and we have the money, I think this is going to go down a lot easier than people would ever expect.
But you have to find a venture capitalist, so to speak, who's actually not a capitalist, or at least isn't expecting anything from you except to deliver on your vision. So it's a capitalist with, it's a investor with no strings attached, or a donor. Now, listen, it's Wednesday, and most of us know what that means. Tony Khan, I know that you pay attention to this channel, so maybe you want to fund this. I don't know.
It just takes one person. That's one of the things, is that there's, wealthy people on both sides of the spectrum who've put a lot of money into making sure their party is representative. And a lot of the people in the center have been reluctant to put their money into it because they don't want to put their foot on the scale either way. This is a way for somebody with money to more or less say, hey, I am restoring the voice of the people. I am going to capitalize on more perfect union. And I think for that they go down in history.
Right. I mean, the most maybe not disingenuous, but incomplete story of the week was the story that, the Republican National Committee has something like, I don't know, like $120 million or whatever. They have a lot of money in the bank, where the Democratic National Committee has negative $2 million and is putting collateral, is putting their building up for a $15 million loan, which I'm sure that's all true. And it's sort of absurdist in its own way, but it's incomplete in that it's because these national committees are rather irrelevant. There's the senatorial committee, there's the congressional committee, there's the presidential committee, and there's the PACs and the super PACs and all of the other dark money and all the corporate money, which that's where the big money is going to. It's not going to the national committee anymore. It's going to, and certainly a little bit more on one side than the other, and they'll have to check their souls one way or the other as to why that is. But there's still plenty of money in, blue coffers. It's just not the Democratic National Committee. And
it's not a good sign.
For them. I mean, I mean, given the polls, it appears incongruous with the pulse of the nation.
I think there's people on both sides that are frustrated with their parties. I think for the folks that are happy on the conservative side, they have deep pockets. And I think what you're just explaining, for the folks that are unhappy on the liberal side, they're keeping their wallets in their pants. And, they could at any point, jump in and bail them out, but for whatever reason, they aren't.
Yeah, sure. I mean, at any moment, Bruce Springsteen and Babs could, could bail them out for sure. Yeah, and I'm not encouraging that, but yeah, I'm not particularly worried one way or another about the fiscal well-being of the Democratic National Committee. But it would be, the only thing worse than two parties is one party. So, yeah, yes, one party. If you only have one party, you really have no parties. So, so that's bad. That's bad stuff. I know I had a thought, but of course I lost it. And unfortunately, that's what happens when you start crossing the past.
Well, when you're talking about conspiracy theories and stuff, I thought you were going to lead into basically election security and, whether things can be hacked. And I just wanted to assure folks that we're looking at, not just looking at, we're working with a company called Votes that does secure mobile voting. They've been doing it for 8 years. Originally, implementation that they used for the military so that folks that were in war zones or on subs could get their votes in when they couldn't get a physical ballot out of that submarine or out of that war zone. So there's been a lot of progress on secure mobile voting. In fact, there's 3 different platforms that have all been highly successful. And this whole notion that, somehow we can transfer money, do Venmo, do gambling, do online banking, and we can't do mobile voting is nonsense. Now, I think that maybe 15, 20 years ago, should there have been concerns? Yes. But we figured out things like two-factor authentication, all these things. This is an election, so it's just a nominating system. So can we come up with a system that's secure enough, to figure out who a nominee is for a district on a small scale? And this is a sandbox, a way to play with this idea. And if it gets hacked, we'll figure it out and figure out how to prevent it.
Yeah, I agree with that, generally speaking. I mean, I think election security, it's important, but it's like an issue. There's not a problem to be fixed. I mean,
right.
Like the Cato Institute and the Heritage Foundation, which is the author of Project 2025, did studies dating back to like the early aughts. And the Heritage Foundation, which is the reason for all of the things that are, whether you like them or not, the hardline immigration policies and the election reform, they found something like 967 incidents of voter fraud since 2002, period. In that time, 2.1 billion votes had been cast. Yeah. So, even the Heritage Foundation, who's the heartbeat behind all the fear mongering, has found. I mean, should we be at zero? Yes. I can't remember what show I was listening to, but it was one of the news shows where you have people from both sides speaking, and in this case, it was a Republican. I think he was a former. He was formerly in one of the Trump White Houses. I don't know the man's name. I don't remember the title, but he was talking about, I think all Americans should care about election security. Listen, people can make mistakes, and computers can be glitched or hacked. Well, I mean, but their solution is only have people do it. I mean, you have to pick one. Neither is going to be perfect. We're always either going to have computers doing it or people doing it or some combination of the two. And there's always going to be, so if the system has made, even in the worst case scenario and by the way, the Cato Institute, they found even lower numbers. They might've been measuring slightly different things. The Cato Institute, for people who don't know, is a libertarian think tank. And so they're not really interested in both of the parties can go jump into the, respective oceans for all they care. But when you come up with 967 or something like that, infinitesimal out of over 2 billion, I mean, try putting that on your calendar. It's like 0.000000001%. I might have too few zeros in there. It's nothing. It's near perfect. So again, it's a non-problem. It's something that's not broken that they're trying to scare us into being fixed. And these are long-term plans to brainwash us into thinking that way. And I'm afraid it's worked with a lot of younger people who've just sort of given up. In the old days, when the young people thought that the system was rigged, they protested, or they did something, or they fled to Canada, or something. They didn't just give up and sit home and go on social media and play video games. Now they just stream Fortnite or something.
Well, and they just reported that New Jersey had, I think, 6,600 instances of people who weren't citizens that were registered. 400 actually voted.
Right.
It's 400 and over 6 million. Right. I mean, that's an irregularity. I mean, these 400 people may not even realize that they couldn't vote. So in that sense, they're like, 400 people. To me, it's a system working. I mean,
and even the system working 2 years later. Yeah. And it was a software error at the MVA. It had nothing to do with the Board of Elections or anything like that. It was with the MVA. So, yeah, I mean, yes, the gentleman was right. Nothing's going to be perfect. It's just, don't tell me that your system is more perfect until you actually are telling me and showing how your system is more perfect. But don't be trying to tell me that, Venezuela and Italy, hacked satellites and I mean, Venezuela, as we know, is not a functional state. Yeah. So I don't know. We could probably sit around and agree with each other for a long time, but I want you again to give your elevator pitch and plug your stuff again as we get to sort of we're getting towards the 1 hour mark. Not exactly, but I think that's sort of a good length for a policy wonk show. I don't know how many policy wonks there are on the Sports Jedi Network.
No, Jeff, I really appreciate you giving me the time. I think we've hit all the buttons. And again, I encourage your audience to check out that website link. Go to the webpage called A Brand New Way that's on that website. There's also FAQs for that. But our goal is to get something in place for 2028 that's going to change the way we choose our representative.
And those of you who are watching live, I see you. I appreciate you. I'm actually surprised at how many of you there are. So maybe there are some policy wonks here. So welcome. I'm glad. I hope you weren't just coming from my pretty face. Maybe they're coming for you. You can't see them, but I can. And of course, this will run in perpetuity on YouTube and Instagram and Kick and Rumble and this place and the other place, Twitch, all sorts of places as well. So thank you very much for being on here. Thanks, folks, for tuning in. On YouTube, it's the Sports Jedi Media Network. Everywhere else, it's the Sports Jedi Network. And this show is Garden of Thought, which, of course, also has its own platform. You can find both Sports Jedi Network podcast and the Garden of Thought podcast on all major platforms. And you can go to the @Garden of Thought pod for the Garden of Thoughts YouTube channel. But there's no visual. It's only the show art and the audio. But for some people, that's fine. Just listen to it as a podcast and don't worry about the screen. Anyway, thanks everyone for tuning in. Thanks our guest. Interesting conversation. I wish you nothing but the best of luck, because I think no matter what, this can do nothing except good things. And as you said, hopefully shake things up, disrupt some things, but disrupt things in a positive direction. Yeah, everyone, if you have a few bucks, throw it their way, but check out the website. As you said, kick the tires yourself first. So follow the man's advice. All right. Thanks everyone for listening. You can catch me here on a bunch of other shows and sometimes some ad hoc shows. We're working on a couple things, but if not before then, certainly on Sunday, where I have a friend of mine who's coming on to talk about the Stephen King universe and especially the Dark Tower series. And I'll run some of my theories by him as well, even though it's been a good 15 years or so since I finished the series. Anyway, thanks everyone for checking it out. Kevin, take us out of here.